Hello, and welcome to Model Railroad Operations, or Model Railroad Gaming, whichever channel you're watching this on. Welcome to the Model Railroad Operations 2000 Subscriber Special. I'm uploading this video to both my channels as the content presented pertains to both. Man, it's safe to say I'm completely blown away with how much this channel has taken off. I know 2,000 subscribers isn't a lot in the grand scheme of YouTube, but it's a significant number nonetheless. Especially in the Model Railroad YouTube community, which is quite niche to begin with, and in particular the aspect of prototype operations. When I first started this channel, I intended for my videos to be viewed as much for training purposes as entertainment. I wasn't satisfied with the quality of videos of model railroads such as Jim Providenza's Santa Cruz Northern, Bill Kaufman's State Bell, and Ed Marin's NWP that existed on the internet at the time. And that even extended to subscription services such as Model Railroad Video Plus, which at least I didn't think covered enough of the aspects of operations as I would have liked. Not that they did a particularly bad job at anything else, though. So I decided I would start my own channel, in which I documented these layouts in a style I enjoyed, as much for my own personal edification than anything else. I made these videos public, however, in case anyone else stumbled upon them and wanted to check them out. And what do you know? 4 years in, and my videos have been presented at regional and national NMRA conventions, and I've been shouted out by some of the biggest names in the Model Railroad YouTube community. Again, I can't thank you all enough, and I greatly appreciate the continued support. I know some videos are better than others, but thank you all nonetheless. So enough formalities, let's get into the good stuff. So first off, I have a huge announcement regarding my personal layout. I introduce to you the Sierra Central Railway. Yes, I am going to be rebuilding my layout. This new design is much more flexible than my previous layout, allowing for different or even mixed eras, as opposed to being locked in the steam era. The SCR is set anywhere between the 1950s and early 1980s. The Sierra Central's concept is basically an amalgamation of the standard and narrow gauge railroads of the Sierra foothills and mountains, namely the Sierra and Amador Central Railroads. The line is proto-freelance, running between Stockton and Merced, California by way of Calaveritas, Angels Camp, and LaGrange, with a short industrial branch to Alta Vista and a much longer branch to Bear Valley and Lake Alpine, where the SCR interchanges with the fictitious extension of the Carson and Colorado Narrow Gauge Railroad. The Cnc Extension runs from the line's historic terminus at Mountain House, Nevada, through Carson City to Minden, where it then turns west and heads into the Sierras to Lake Alpine and the SCR interchange. In the world of the Sierra Central, the CNC managed to hold on for long enough to obtain second-hand locomotives and rolling stock for the DNRGW narrow gauge in Colorado and New Mexico, including K27 and C19 locomotives, as well as numerous pieces of rolling stock and cabooses. Who knows? If things go well for the CNC, it may even dieselize, but nobody's holding their breath. Now, I'll take you all through the design process for this layout. So for this build, I knew I wanted to do it right this time, so I hired a professional, Peter Lloyd Lee of Superior Model Railroads, to design the layout. Having watched his YouTube content and his videos covering layout designs, I knew he would be able to make the best use of my available space, surely better than anything I could ever come up with. Peter's channel will be linked in the description, as well as all the other channels I will cover later in the video. So now, here we are on my desktop, and let's get right into it and see the design process for the Sierra Central Railway. So at first, Peter plotted out sort of the general arrangement where the helixes and whatnot would go, because the way the layout room is laid out, that would require us to cut back 24 inches of the wall cabinets on either end, about 1 door's width, in order to allow for inside access to the helixes, which we will eventually do. I intend on using trackside scenery's easy to assemble lightweight helix kits for this particular design. And the actual helix sections are going to be completely separate from the scenic scenes of the layout. They're going to be like completely painted black. The backside of the backdrop is going to be painted black, so on and so forth. So here's the first design, just looking at the space we got here and looking at where the general things are going to go. So this is the first iteration of level 1, which is a combination staging level and sort of switching towns and stuff like that. A couple of switching towns. This is going to model sort of the Central Valley section of the railroad, because in the concept, the Sierra Central is essentially, think of the Sierra Railway if it was more of a Class 2 regional as opposed to a Class 3 short line. So there's going to be more like hot shots and manifest freights and higher horsepower locomotives and stuff like that. So this particular section will model Calaveritas and LaGrange respectively on the west wall and east wall, and adjacent to them will be the staging yards representing Stockton and Merced. So if you look to the left of the design right here, this would eventually become Calaveritas, and this would become LaGrange, and this is Stockton Staging Yard, and this is Merced Staging. So that's the first design for level 1. And this is the first iteration of level 2, which is modeling the Sierra foothills. This area here labeled Main Yard would eventually become Angels Camp, and would eventually include a lumber mill and a freight house and a really nice little interchange yard, as well as the engine service. However, Peter added this industrial branch over the West Helix, which I pretty quickly jumped at. I thought it was a great idea, and so we decided to expand upon that. And this is the first iteration of the third level, which includes the narrow gauge section, of course representing the Carson and Colorado Railway. Now this is just a very early iteration. This of course would change a lot later on, but as you can see, we got narrow gauge staging down here and a logging line over here and another little spur over here, and the narrow gauge standard gauge interchange over here. So this is the next iteration of the design, and as you can see, there's a bit more detail fleshed out here. At this point, I had given Peter the kind of industries that I wanted to model on this section, as well as the rest of the layout. So again, as you can see, the two staging yards, and we'll first take a look over here at Calaveritas. We got a depot. He labeled this as an oil dealer. I eventually got that changed to a fuel dealer with a coal trestle. Farmers Co-op with a wooden grain elevator. Team track that shares the spur with the oil dealer, and a lumber yard. I have the Walthers Cornerstone Walton and Sons lumber company, which has the closed shed, so that gives an opportunity to extend the spur under the helix. So I really like that idea. And he also shows the staging yard extending under the helix as well, and I too like that idea as well. And this continuous cutoff here, I wanted to have a continuous cutoff to be able to run trains continuously, but as far as operations go, this is going to be used as dual interchanges. I'm thinking on this end it will be the Southern Pacific, and on this end it will be the Santa Fe. So, and there's also 14-degree crossing where the tracks cross at grade. So that'll be a nice opportunity to model something maybe akin to the Yosemite Valley Railway's crossing of the Santa Fe Railway on its line between Merced and El Portal. So over here in Calaveritas, we got Team Track. At this point, he labeled it a manufacturing industry. Eventually, I got that changed to the SCP Foundation. I'll explain that a little bit more later. Then we have just another generic industry over here. Here's another farmers co-op, and here's another offstage industry. Eventually, that became a scrap yard. And so up here on the second level, the industrial district has been fleshed out a little bit more. And at this point, Peter put in a grain elevator because I had expressed interest in a grain elevator at that particular point in time, but that was eventually changed to Valley Cement, and you'll see where Valley Cement is on this iteration of the plan. But some of the other industries here have remained relatively the same. The packing plant eventually became a little bit more modest, and then there's, of course, small industries that later got fleshed out a bit more. Of course, up here we got the lumber mill, we got the branch line engine service. Peter called it a short line, but for me it's going to be a branch line. and the lumber mill, then the freight house, and then the interchange yard. And it says arid canyon scene because at this point I actually was thinking about modeling Eastern Oregon. But eventually I had a change of heart and I moved the railroad to the Sierras as opposed to Eastern Oregon. But here's the branch line coming out of the yard and going up to level 3, and here's the main line going back down to level 1. Now up here, in this iteration of the plan, up here on the narrow gauge section, the staging still extends down this way. This later got changed. And in this version of the plan, the Valley Cement, the Walters Valley Cement kit, is a dual gauge industry. So the way it worked would be narrow gauge trains would come out of staging, do an end swap here at the interchange area, and then run raw materials down to the cement plant, whereas a standard gauge would bring in the cement hoppers and stuff like that. And then, of course, up here we've fleshed out the narrow gauge interchange a little bit more, and now we have a gravity and load mineral transfer. I really liked the what the Southern Pacific had at Oweno on the actual Carson, Colorado narrow gauge, where interchanged with the Lone Pine branch. So I really like that scene. So I wanted to have that sort of represented here in one way or another. And then over here we have an oil transfer, and then the narrow gauge standard gauge interchange, and then we have a small narrow gauge engine service facility over here. At this point he's calling it a cannery, but eventually you just turn this into a generic industry. It's still gonna be a cannery though, probably. And then here we got line truncated, so it says that the bridge removed, implying that the branch once went further. But I think when I actually go to build it, I think I'm just going to have the narrow gauge interchange be the terminus of the branch, as opposed to implying that it went further once. I think I'm just going to terminate it here, but that's how Peter put it. He truncated the line, removed the bridge. So on to the next iteration of the plan. At this point, the Valley Cement had been removed from the narrow gauge section and had been moved to the west side, west wall industrial section. And this sort of layout eventually really kind of came to stick, because we got this sort of medium industry here, we got a couple small industries here, we got a concrete pipe manufacturer, and of course Valley Cement, and then the lumber mill still being worked on, and this area has remained relatively unchanged. And so now, eventually, in working with Peter, I determined that instead of Valley Cement up here, because as you saw in the last plan, we moved it back down to the second level, I instead wanted a narrow gauge switching district. So Peter put that in, and there's a small passing siding, and there's two spurs off this passing siding. One spur wound up serving 3 narrow gauge industries, and this one up here wound up becoming a log spur. And going back to the interchange area, I forgot to mention this, but this spur right here eventually became both pulpwood and regular log loading. I have a whole thing in my operations scheme where I'll have the branch line local come up and exchange logs with the narrow gauge and also exchange logs with the spur here. So it's going to be a very involved operation, so I'm really looking forward to that eventually. And finally, this is the final version of level 1. At that point, I was pretty satisfied with everything that was included, and so I told Peter to go ahead and finish the plan, and so this is what we got. So following a train, here we got Stockton Staging, and as you can see, it too extends underneath the helix. So we come out of Stockton Staging, we cross over the other main line, we come into Calaveritas, which now has a farmer's co-op with the wind grain leveler, still has that. And it's also got the interchange track over here, which is also a continuous running track. And over here we also got a team track, and of course we got a depot, and then a fuel dealer with the coal trestle, as I requested. And then of course the lumber yard with the spur extending underneath the helix. Then the track goes up into the helix, and as you can see there's one of the turnouts is inside of the helix, so that'll just have to be indicated in some way or another. And then we go up to level 2. So here at level 2, we come out of the helix and we cross underneath the ceiling mounted cabinets here, and we come to the junction for the branch, or the industrial branch. And down here, we have, of course, Valley Cement, concrete pipe manufacturer, which is mostly off stage, but we'll probably have, the gondola loading over here, and maybe, off spot or materials track over here or something like that. Then we have the two small industries, which I'm thinking that one will be like a building materials yard, and the other one will be Dr. Wondertainment Toys, which is another reference to the SCP Foundation, which again I'll explain once I get through this design. And then of course this is labeled as a large boxcar industry, but it's probably going to be a reefer industry, some sort of produce packers or something like that. So coming back up to the yard, we now have the lumber mill fully fleshed out, and here we have a lumber loading track. So that'll load boxcars, bulkhead flats, so on and so forth. And we have a chip loading spur, so that'll load wood chip hoppers. And we have a log unloading spur next to a log pond. So that'll give a real nice place for the log trains coming down from the branch to, dump their logs. Then, of course, we have the freight house, and we have the interchange yard extending underneath the ceiling cabinets again, and which will give us plenty of car capacity. And so I really like that. And then, of course, we have a sort of a dual bridge scene. We got a little creek going through here, and we have a through truss bridge down here and a low trestle up here. And, of course, the branch line goes up to level 3, and the main line goes back down to level 2. So here at level 3, the branch line comes up, and we have the pulpwood and log loading spur. And then, of course, we have the narrow gauge interchange, where we have a transfer dock, and we even have an overhead crane. Peter was able to fit that in there, so I was very pleasantly surprised by that. And he was able to fit in 2 additional standard gauge industrial spurs, which I had requested, not knowing if he'd actually be able to do it or not, but he managed, and I'm of course very thankful for that. So one is another fuel dealer which has a coal trestle, and the other is probably going to be the aforementioned cannery from before. So at this point we have the ore transfer, which is a gravity unloader. So again, like the SP had at Awenyo, the ore hoppers will come up and they will dump their loads into from the bottom into waiting standard gauge hoppers. Then over here we have the oil transfer and of course the narrow gauge engine service facility with the shed, garden track, and another storage siding. And also, he was able to fit in a passenger station. His reasoning for that would be that the narrow gauge runs a tourist train during the summer months. I don't necessarily know about a tourist train, but maybe it'll definitely be like a train order depot at the very least. Then coming up here, we have the junction for the gravity unloader. Another dual bridge scene. We have an alpine lake up here, so I really like that. And now a nice alpine lake because this particular branch line is supposed to be like way up in the mountains, so you have an alpine lake here, and then coming into the narrow gauge town, we have the spur with 3 industries on it. These include a narrow gauge team track, stock pen, and ore loader, and we also have a log loading area from the narrow gauge. So in operations, we'll have a log train that comes out of staging, and it will swap loads and empties out the loader, and then we'll take everything up to the interchange to be interchanged with the standard gauge, then go back with the empties, and so on and so forth. So that's about that for the design. So I said I'd explain the SCP Foundation. So this industry down here, now the SCP Foundation, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is a sort of genre of internet horror story writing, but it's formatted in such a way that it looks like a formal log in a Foundation database. So the SCP stands for Secure, Contain, Protect, and their mission statement is that they protect mankind from anomalous persons, entities, phenomenon, objects, so on and so forth. So the SCP Foundation on the layout will pretty much receive boxcars and tank cars, and of course all their ladings are going to be redacted because this is absolute top secret that they're going in here. Your crews will just set it and forget it pretty much. So this is going to be the SCP Foundation. If you want If you want to learn more about it, there's some much better videos online that explain it much better than I ever could. And I also forgot to mention, of course, we still have the team track and the farmers co-op and the scrapyard that was the offstage industry. We also forgot. I also forgot to mention that Peter included a tall industry and a low industry to kind of give a scenic divider between here and the staging yard. I haven't quite decided what these are going to be yet, and but it looks like this track goes inside the industry, so that'll be very interesting to do. And yeah, I'll eventually figure out what these are going to be. Maybe another produce distributor or something like that, another reefer industry. But you know, I'll come to that eventually. So I think I'll just kind of end here on this particular spot in the design and get back to the subscriber special. I will be building this layout over the course of the summer and hope to have the main line operational by the time I return to college in the fall. If you want a professional to design your model railroad, I cannot recommend Peter enough. He truly goes the extra mile for his customers and can sometimes achieve the seemingly impossible for a layout. Go check him out. His link is in the description. Next, I'd like to shout out a few channels that I've found recently. These channels are for the most part fairly unknown, however there are a couple more popular ones. Firstly, I'd like to mention Roy Smith of the N-Scale UP Evanston Sub for shouting out my channel a while back in one of his dispatch videos. So thank you, Roy, and keep up your good work. The next channel is Dinner from the Dining Car. This is a bit of a deviation from model trains, but I think it's worthwhile to mention anyways. What this channel does is cook meals historically found on the menus of various railroads of yesteryear. Dishes such as Southern Pacific French toast, Pennsylvania Railroad Swedish meatballs, and Illinois Central Bananas Foster are just a few of the dishes that can be found on this channel. Check them out. Next is Dagai and Trains. This is another N-scale modeler who I think has an amazing quality of professionalism to his videos, and a simple yet very effective approach to things such as scenery. I will definitely take some notes from this channel for my new layout. Lastly, and this is one of the more popular channels mentioned, SMT Mainline. This channel specializes in the repair and restoration of vintage model trains and is well worth a watch, be it for entertainment or for information on the maintenance and upkeep of model trains. Be sure to check Harrison out. Well, that about completes it for the 2,000 subscriber special. Again, thank you all for the support. I greatly appreciate it. And as for future plans, hopefully I'll be able to get to operating the Santa Cruz Northern Part 5 at some point. I am also streaming on Twitch at Model Railroad Gaming. I'll be live streaming the building of the Sierra Central, as well as playing whatever other games I feel like playing, be they simulators, tycoons, or others. And if you miss the streams, I'll be uploading both the VODs and the highlights to my second channel, Model Railroad Gaming. I hope you've all enjoyed this special, and thanks for watching.